What if the darkest scandal of World War I wasn't only about torpedoes and sinking ships, but about secrets so filthy they could rival Jeffrey Epstein's empire of exploitation? In 1917, German U-boats prowled the seas, drowning thousands in silence. Yet hidden beneath the decks was another war, an unspeakable battle of lust, power, and betrayal. Sailors, cut off from land for months, surrendered to forbidden passions that officers weaponized for control. Just as Harvey Weinstein manipulated women in Hollywood with promises and threats, commanders exploited fear and secrecy to dominate crews trapped in steel coffins beneath the ocean. This is the story the history books tried to bury, because what happened inside those submarines was as shocking as the wars they fought outside. The German U-boat was not just a machine of war, it was a floating prison. 50 men packed into narrow steel corridors, air thick with sweat, fear, and silence. Death was outside in the water, but inside another war brewed. Isolation is the mother of secrets. The crews of U-boats spent weeks, sometimes months, submerged in darkness. There was no sun, no fresh air, no escape. Men slept shoulder to shoulder, their bodies brushing against one another in cramped bunks. Hunger, fear, and proximity created a dangerous intimacy. Rumors circulated of sailors forming bonds that crossed the invisible lines of duty. Diaries found after the war revealed shocking confessions, moments where sailors whispered into the night, their hands brushing in shadows, desire blooming where discipline demanded silence. A lieutenant wrote, "The sea swallows our souls, but below deck, forbidden fire keeps us alive." The officers knew, some exploited it. In exchange for silence or protection, certain commanders turned intimacy into currency. Younger sailors, terrified of punishment or exposure, surrendered themselves for a taste of safety. Just as Harvey Weinstein used his power to force obedience in Hollywood, officers on U-boats used secrecy to command not only loyalty, but bodies. On land, these men were heroes. Below the surface, they were captives to their own urges. War blurred morality. Survival excused everything. Every night in those tight quarters, glances lingered, breaths quickened, and temptation thrived. The line between brotherhood and forbidden passion dissolved in the suffocating steel tomb. But the scandal wasn't confined to submarines. Whenever the U-boats resurfaced at hidden bases along occupied coasts, officers indulged in arrangements with local women, sometimes voluntary, often coerced. In Belgium and northern France, desperate widows and daughters were pressured into secret liaisons, offered food or protection in return. Court records from 1919 reveal shocking testimonies. One French woman, Marie Claire, admitted she was forced into weeks of service for German officers, describing nights where fear mixed with humiliation, but resistance meant starvation for my family. Her story mirrors the unspeakable abuses later revealed in modern sex trafficking rings like Jeffrey Epstein's. The difference, in 1917, secrecy was total. Newspapers printed only patriotic victories, never the scandals corroding military honor. Even among sailors, these shore encounters carried shame and whispers. Diaries uncovered in archives describe how men mocked each other for what they had seen or done. One passage recalls a drunken night where soldiers boasted of conquests, while others sat silent, guilt etched on their faces. The brutality of war erased choice. Hunger, power, and desperation fused into a theater of sexual transactions that no historian at the time dared to publish. The German Navy was determined to maintain its aura of discipline. Behind that mask, women bore scars not unlike those later exposed in Hollywood's casting couch scandals, scars hidden behind closed doors. Not every secret surfaced. Many were drowned along with the men who carried them. U-boats sank with entire crews, their bodies sealed in steel coffins at the bottom of the sea. Along with them went the truth of their hidden lives. One chilling account comes from U-boat 110, recovered after being sunk in 1918. Among the water-damaged papers were torn fragments of letters, one sailor begging forgiveness from a woman back home for Things I Cannot Confess, another describing nights of temptation and surrender in the dark. These were not tales of honor, but whispers of shame that drowned with their authors. The German Navy burned most surviving documents, silencing witnesses and erasing stains on its reputation. Yet fragments remain, enough to reveal a story of power and submission, of men stripped of humanity by war and driven into acts they could neither admit nor undo. The ocean swallowed evidence, but not memory. Survivors carried their guilt into silence, never speaking of what truly happened below deck. History records torpedo strikes and tonnage sunk, but the unspeakable truth of submarine life remains buried. Like Epstein's Black Book, everyone knew it existed, but few dared open it. What you've just heard is only the first crack in the armor of the German U-boats. Behind every sinking ship lay another hidden scandal, one that twisted love, lust, and loyalty. And next, we'll uncover a story so disturbing that it reached Berlin's highest command. Are you ready? What if the very leaders in Berlin, the ones preaching discipline and patriotism, were themselves entangled in the very scandals festering beneath the sea? As submarines stalked the Atlantic, secret desires found their way back to Germany's highest command. While sailors drowned in secrecy below deck, in Berlin, the Navy's upper command knew whispers of these unspeakable acts. Reports occasionally surfaced, coded references to disciplinary indiscretions or inappropriate fraternities. These words veiled far more scandalous realities. Some commanders in Berlin didn't just know, they participated. Whenever U-boat officers returned for debriefings, certain men carried more than maps and naval reports. They carried diaries, drawings, and letters. These were traded, not unlike contraband, among men who wielded power in the Reichstag corridors. Historians unearthed references in confiscated archives that hint at these practices. A Navy clerk's diary mentions a gathering in 1917 where stories from the depths were performed like theater for ministers. Instead of shock, these tales elicited laughter, wagers, and even imitation. This mirrors modern scandals like the Prince Andrew Epstein revelations, where elite men were not horrified by abuse, but instead indulged in circles of secrecy, each protecting the other. In Berlin, to question was dangerous. Silence was survival. When scandals reached the Kaiser's ears, they were dismissed as gossip. The war needed heroes, not shame. Just as Hollywood protected Weinstein for decades, Berlin's elites shrouded their Navy's darkest secrets under banners of honor and sacrifice. The capital became complicit. Stories born in submarines were amplified in Berlin's smoky parlors, turning acts of survival and coercion into grotesque entertainment for the privileged. Shore leave, usually a sailor's reprieve, often turned into another theater of unspeakable acts. When U-boats docked in occupied Belgium or at secret bases along the North Sea, officers arranged visits with local women. Many were not voluntary. One Belgian widow testified after the war that she was forced to host German officers weekly, describing how refusal meant her son's conscription into forced labor. She wrote, "I traded my body to keep my child alive." This echoes modern sex trafficking rings, where choice is erased by threats and power. Records from Allied investigations note cases where German officers held competitions during shore leave, mocking contests to see who could seduce or coerce the most women in a night. Witnesses described drunken laughter, women weeping quietly in corners, and superiors turning a blind eye. One U-boat officer reportedly kept a ledger documenting his victories. That ledger vanished after the war, but was referenced in testimony during the 1919 Treaty of Versailles inquiries. The Allies wanted to expose German cruelty, but chose to emphasize military crimes over sexual ones, considering them indecent for public debate. This pattern of silence, ignoring sexual scandal to maintain political narratives, remains familiar today. Think of how long the Catholic Church hid abuse scandals, or how institutions protected figures like R. Kelly until public pressure made silence impossible. In 1917, women's voices were drowned by the roar of war, their suffering footnotes in the history of glory. The greatest weapon against secrecy is paper. Letters, diaries, and confessions carried truths officials wanted buried. Allied forces intercepted correspondence between U-boat officers and families back home. Some letters hinted at indiscretions. Others described bonds too strong to sever. One infamous intercepted letter, archived in London, described a sailor's confession. "I have shared myself with him, my comrade, as much as with you. War makes men different. Do not hate me." The letter never reached his wife. Instead, it became intelligence material, proof that Germany's navy was cracking, not just militarily, but morally. But the Allies never publicized it. Why? Because scandal was a double-edged sword. Britain's own forces carried similar secrets, and exposure risked mutual embarrassment. Silence served both sides. Inside Germany, intercepted letters terrified the Navy. They ordered systematic burning of private correspondence at ports to prevent leaks. Survivors were threatened with court-martial for even whispering about what happened below deck. Yet fragments survived. Letters hidden under floorboards, diaries tucked into family trunks. One such diary was discovered in 1991 by a historian in Hamburg, detailing games played on submarines, where young recruits were humiliated for entertainment. The chilling similarity to modern hazing scandals, like U.S. military abuse in Abu Ghraib, shows how power warps into cruelty when hidden from the world. These letters were not just confessions, they were betrayals. They exposed men stripped of humanity by isolation, commanders who weaponized shame, and institutions that buried everything under patriotism. Berlin's complicity and the letters of shame only scratched the surface. The next scandal reached even higher, dragging the Kaiser's close circle into shadows they never wanted revealed. What if the empire's image of loyalty and honor was built on a foundation of unspeakable corruption? Stay tuned. What if the Kaiser's closest allies, men who dined at his table, drafted his decrees, and planned his submarine strategy, were themselves drowning in secret scandals? History whispers that loyalty to the throne was not built on honor, but on silence. In 1917, while German submarines prowled the seas, Berlin's political heart pulsed with rumors. Kaiser Wilhelm II projected discipline, yet his private circle was riddled with whispers of indulgence and forbidden liaisons. Historians uncovered accounts of secret salons hosted in Berlin, where naval officers returning from the front shared stories not just of torpedoes, but of unspeakable acts committed during endless months beneath the waves. These gatherings often included members of the Kaiser's household staff, advisors, and even aristocrats who saw themselves as above scrutiny. One British intelligence report, declassified decades later, suggested that some within the Kaiser's court actively encouraged these tales. To bind men with secrets is to control them, the report claimed. The same tactic would later be seen in modern power structures, from Harvey Weinstein's Hollywood circle to Jeffrey Epstein's infamous island. Men were not merely indulging desires, they were weaving networks of blackmail and complicity. Court diarists noted that Wilhelm himself had a fascination with naval culture, surrounding himself with officers who were whispered to be involved in fraternities of the sea. The lines between camaraderie exploitation and coercion blurred. To be within the Kaiser's good graces often meant ignoring or participating in behavior far removed from the moral standards preached to ordinary Germans. This duality, public virtue, private vice, formed the foundation of a power structure that sustained itself through mutual corruption. The U-boat was not merely a weapon, it was a stage for dominance. Confined quarters meant hierarchy was not only enforced militarily, but also physically and psychologically. Officers wielded total control over their crews, and stories emerged of this control manifesting in humiliating rituals. One survivor's post-war testimony described how recruits were forced to perform degrading acts as part of initiation games. The testimony, buried in archives until the 1970s, included chilling details of coercion framed as loyalty tests. Sailors who resisted risked harsher punishments or accusations of treason. This mirrored practices uncovered in modern military scandals, such as the hazing rituals at Abu Ghraib, where abuse was normalized under the guise of control and dominance. In both cases, institutions looked away, claiming these were isolated incidents, while privately acknowledging their pervasiveness. What made the submarine setting uniquely disturbing was the combination of secrecy and desperation. Dozens of men trapped together for weeks without sunlight created an environment ripe for psychological breakdown. Power, desire, and fear collided, producing acts that blurred lines between survival, coercion, and cruelty. Captured Allied intelligence referenced games of dominance on board U-boats, often disguised in coded language. The words night watch rituals or depth charge tests masked far darker realities. British censors chose not to publicize them, fearing that revealing German scandal might expose their own Navy's skeletons. Thus, submarines became both weapon and prison, stage and secret chamber. Amidst these scandals, one figure remained hauntingly silent: the Kaiserin Augustina Victoria, the Kaiser's wife. Her role in public was to embody virtue, family, and morality, yet in private, she bore witness to whispers of corruption that tainted her husband's reign. Letters discovered in her estate suggest she was aware of the scandals but was powerless to intervene. One letter to a confidant read, "The men return from the sea with stories unfit for Christian ears, yet they are rewarded with medals. I remain silent, for silence is safer than truth." Her silence mirrors countless women tied to powerful men in modern scandals, wives who knew but stayed quiet, fearing ruin. Consider Hillary Clinton during Bill Clinton's impeachment trial, or Melania Trump amidst the Stormy Daniels revelations. History often demands silence from women to preserve dynasties, even as corruption corrodes the core. The Kaiserin's silence did more than protect her husband, it allowed an empire's darkest secrets to fester unchallenged. The court's silence and the Kaiserin's submission only deepened the empire's corruption, but the darkest revelations were yet to come. What happened when these unspeakable scandals escaped the walls of Berlin and reached foreign shores, threatening not just reputations, but Germany's entire war strategy? The storm was coming. What happens when the enemy learns your darkest secrets? For Germany, the scandal of submarine warfare was not just about torpedoes, it was about the hidden acts aboard U-boats that, once exposed, threatened to collapse an empire from within. In 1917, as the war raged across the seas, the British Navy captured several German submariners. While interrogations usually focused on technical intelligence, torpedo mechanisms, fuel capacity, patrol routes, some prisoners revealed shocking accounts of what life aboard the steel coffins was truly like. A declassified Admiralty report recorded sailors breaking down under questioning, not from fear of betrayal, but from shame. One prisoner confessed, "We were made to submit in ways that cannot be spoken aloud." The interrogator, confused, noted cryptic phrases like ritual humiliation and night tests. These testimonies were initially dismissed as delirium until multiple prisoners repeated them with chilling consistency. British intelligence began to realize that the German Navy's strength also carried a hidden weakness: the shame of its men. Just as later scandals like Abu Ghraib or the Epstein network relied on silence and complicity, these submarine stories showed how shame could become a weapon. To the British, the psychological toll was as valuable as any military map. By exploiting scandal, they could weaken morale from the inside. News of these testimonies soon leaked into Britain's propaganda machine. The British War Propaganda Bureau prepared pamphlets implying German naval officers indulged in acts of dishonor beneath the waves. Though details were vague, the suggestion alone was enough to stir public outrage. Cartoons in Punch magazine mocked the U-boats not as mighty predators, but as dens of perversion. The subtle message, Germany's navy, feared for its ruthlessness, was rotting morally. The strategy worked. Across Britain and France, civilians began to see the enemy not only as cruel, but also as corrupted. This mirrored how modern scandals play out in media today. Consider the Monica Lewinsky affair in the US. A private act became global ridicule once spun by press and propaganda. In the same way, whispers from captured submariners became headlines designed to erode Germany's image. For the Allies, the moral scandal was as powerful as the sinking of ships. For Germany, it meant fighting a war on two fronts, the battlefield and the battlefield of reputation. The German Admiralty reacted with fury. Official statements branded the rumors as English lies, but private letters reveal a panic within naval command. Officers feared that the shameful confessions could demoralize crews already pushed to breaking point. One memorandum warned, "These stories, if believed, will fracture discipline more than enemy shells." Admirals debated how to contain the scandal. Some called for harsh crackdowns, executions of suspected whistleblowers. Others advised silence, knowing further inquiry might expose truths better left buried. The secrecy recalls modern crises, like the Weinstein scandal. When whispers became lawsuits, silence only made the eruption louder. In 1917, the Germans stood on the edge of the same abyss. Kaiser Wilhelm himself, already under pressure for the war's failures, was briefed on the matter. He raged at his advisors. Better to sink with honor than live with shame. But the truth was out, among allies, among enemies, and most dangerously, among his own men. The Allies now had Germany's hidden shame in their arsenal, but the most explosive scandal was yet to surface, not from captured sailors, but from the very heart of Berlin. What if the empire's elite were caught in the same web of corruption as its submarine crews? Imagine Berlin in 1917, not just the capital of war, but a city where elite officers, politicians, and aristocrats gathered in secret salons, indulging in desires as reckless as their military gambles. Could a nation fight when its leaders were bound by scandal? While submarines prowled beneath the seas, Berlin's upper class sought their own escape from the crushing weight of war. Behind unmarked doors on Unter den Linden, elite gatherings unfolded. These weren't merely evenings of champagne and piano. According to police reports later unearthed, they were dens of ritualized pleasure, where uniforms and titles became props in dangerous games of dominance. One captured diary from a Prussian officer described nights where admirals danced in chains and senators whispered forbidden oaths. The secrecy mirrored what the submarine crews endured: domination, submission, ritual humiliation, except here it was clothed in velvet rather than steel. Just as Harvey Weinstein's secret Hollywood parties decades later concealed abuses beneath glamour, Berlin's salons operated under a facade of patriotism. The participants claimed these rituals forged loyalty, yet whispers suggested they forged blackmail instead. By 1917, the Kaiser's court was drowning in rumors. Some of the most powerful men in Germany were compromised, not by military defeat, but by the threat of exposure. Letters exchanged between an aristocratic hostess and a naval officer revealed coded references to loyalty rituals that could ruin reputations if revealed. British intelligence, ever hungry for psychological warfare, intercepted some of these letters. For them, the scandal was gold. Why launch torpedoes when whispers could sink an admiral? Historians later noted eerie parallels with the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. Powerful figures trapped in webs of silence, bound not by law, but by fear of exposure. In 1917, as in modern times, the most dangerous weapon wasn't a gun, it was shame. The German Admiralty scrambled to contain leaks. Some officers were quietly reassigned, others sent to distant fronts. But the web was too wide, too tangled. Scandal had already seeped into the heart of command. Kaiser Wilhelm II, already mocked abroad for his bluster, now faced whispers that his empire's elite were compromised by vice. He erupted in rage during a meeting, declaring, "Better 1,000 dead sailors than one admiral shamed." Yet his fury could not erase the reality. Among Berlin's citizens, food riots erupted. Families starved while elites drowned in champagne. The hypocrisy mirrored modern outrage over leaders exposed during the Partygate scandal in Britain, when the powerful feasted while the public suffered. The same fracture occurred in 1917 Berlin. Trust collapsed. Letters from civilians show the bitterness. "My children starve while they dress in silk and play games of shame." For the first time, it wasn't just the war's bloodshed, it was its hidden scandals that threatened to topple morale. Berlin's scandals revealed a rot at the top. But the most devastating story was not in the salons of aristocrats. It was in the shadows of occupied territories, where desire and domination blurred into brutality. When soldiers carried shame into conquered lands, the war's darkest chapter unfolded. What happens when soldiers, already twisted by months of submarine confinement, step onto occupied soil? In 1917, German forces carried their shame from the sea into villages, turning desire into domination and secrecy into brutality. Here, the war became unspeakable. German troops stationed in occupied Belgium and Flanders were infamous for harsh rule. Yet hidden beneath requisitions and patrols were stories far darker than simple occupation. Villagers whispered of officers who treated towns like private playgrounds, where loyalty was extracted through coercion and intimacy turned into humiliation. One Belgian diary entry from 1917 described, "The men of the sea come ashore with hunger in their eyes, not for bread, but for flesh. They do not ask, they command." Historians later connected these accounts to crews fresh from submarine duty, where dominance had become ritual. The lines between battlefield cruelty and personal vice blurred. This was not new. Centuries later, UN reports on abuses during peacekeeping missions in Africa echoed similar horrors. Power without oversight always carried the same poison. Allied propagandists seized on these stories. Leaflets dropped from the sky told civilians, "The German is not only a killer of ships, but a violator of homes." At first, people thought exaggeration, a weapon of words. But testimony from refugees proved otherwise. By 1917, the press in Britain and France carried accounts of German soldiers demanding tribute from women in occupied towns. The pattern was clear. Men trained to dominate within the confined darkness of U-boats carried those rituals ashore. What was framed as discipline at sea became abuse on land. This was history repeating itself. Just as the Abu Ghraib scandal in Iraq revealed how institutionalized humiliation spreads beyond its walls, Germany's wartime culture of dominance spilled into every corner it touched. Berlin denied the stories, calling them fabrications of English liars. Yet court documents from Belgium after the war told otherwise. Victims described rituals of shame eerily similar to what submariners had confessed under interrogation. Inside Germany, whispers of these stories reached even the most loyal citizens. Some wives of officers returned home with tales they dared not repeat. Mothers wept when sons confessed the things they had been ordered to do in occupied towns. Silence was the only shield against disgrace. But silence had a cost. Just as in the Harvey Weinstein scandal, where countless victims remained quiet for fear of losing careers, ordinary Germans found that speaking out meant exile or worse. Families chose shame over survival. Letters intercepted by Allied intelligence revealed the inner torment. We are no longer men of honor, only beasts of the sea carried to land. Such words tore apart the myth of German superiority. For an empire that prided itself on discipline, its moral collapse was laid bare. The Kaiser's dream of naval dominance was rotting from within, poisoned not by torpedoes or blockades, but by scandal. Occupied lands bore scars deeper than trenches. What began in the steel belly of submarines spread across Europe, infecting even Germany's allies. But the greatest betrayal was yet to come, from within the empire itself, when scandal touched the very strategies meant to win the war.
What destroys empires faster, torpedoes or truth? In 1917, Germany discovered the answer. While U-boats ruled the seas, it was scandal and shame that tore the empire apart, proving that secrecy cannot survive once the world learns its darkest sins. As the war dragged into its bloodiest year, whispers of submarine debauchery reached even the Kaiser's court. Intelligence reports revealed officers not only waged war on seas, but orchestrated rituals of humiliation in occupied ports. Berlin's high command feared these tales more than enemy fleets. One intercepted diary from a commander's wife described, "My husband returns not as man, but as shadow. He seeks submission, demands rituals he learned beneath the waves. I fear he no longer belongs to me, but to the sea." Just as modern scandals, like the Jeffrey Epstein revelations, exposed entire networks, German secrets threatened to reveal a culture of institutionalized abuse. When power is unchecked, corruption spreads upward until leaders themselves are ensnared in the web. By late 1917, British propaganda no longer needed invention. They had testimony, documents, and victims. Newspapers ran headlines, "Germany's underwater beasts ashore." French pamphlets distributed to civilians compared German officers to predators, their rituals of dominance proof that Prussian honor was a myth. Like the Monica Lewinsky scandal, decades later, where one secret reshaped a presidency, Germany's hidden shame reshaped its war. Neutral nations, like the United States, already outraged by the sinking of the Lusitania, now saw moral collapse as reason enough to resist. The submarine campaign had begun as a strategy to choke Britain's supply lines. It ended as a symbol of German depravity, a weapon that backfired. For every ship sunk, stories of unspeakable acts spread faster, poisoning Germany's reputation worldwide. Inside Germany, censorship tried to bury the stories. Newspapers were ordered silent, diaries were confiscated, victims were threatened. Yet, silence collapsed under its own weight. Soldiers wrote home, refugees told tales, interrogated captains revealed truths. It was no longer about strategy, it was about survival of dignity. Families of sailors begged the government, "Stop this war, for it corrupts the soul." Church leaders whispered sermons about sin spreading through the empire's veins. As the war neared its end, even loyal officers admitted the truth. Germany had unleashed monsters not only on seas, but in hearts. Like Harvey Weinstein's fall, once one victim spoke, others followed. The empire stood naked before the world, stripped of honor. The unrestricted submarine warfare of 1917 didn't just sink ships, it sank Germany's moral foundation. Empires fall not only by enemy fire, but by unspeakable secrets they cannot hide. History warns us, scandals spread like flames, and when honor is lost, no empire can survive the inferno.